Autobiography of William Conrad Henslee, October 23rd, 1832 to July 24th, 1865. Written by Joe Henslee, September the 15th, 2001. And my name is Daniel Hamby, son-in-law of Louis Henslee. My name is William Conrad Henslee. Many of you have only heard of me by the name William Henslee. I'm the one who was in the Civil War and never returned home. There's precious little information about me that's been passed down by my family. Well, one of the reasons is I never really learned to read and write as I was growing up in the mountains of North Carolina and Georgia. And there weren't many schools that I could have attended as I was growing up. Much of my time before the Civil War was spent farming and keeping food on the table. Education was just secondary to feeding my family. This letter should hopefully give you a little more insight into my life than you currently have been told. My ancestors, Burke County, North Carolina. But first, let me give you a brief summary of my ancestral line, compiled from notes and research by one of my great-great-grandsons. I was born in Monroe County, Tennessee, on October the 15th, 1832. I was the third son of Benjamin Henslee, who was born in 1805 in Burke County, North Carolina. He was born in what is now McDowell County, North Carolina, as the first son of Benjamin Henslee, my grandfather, whom I referenced earlier, who was born in Henry County, Virginia, 1776, who was the son of Benjamin Henslee, born before 1755, who was the son of Benjamin Henslee, born about 1730, all from Virginia. My oldest brother, Benjamin F. Henslee, was born in 1826 or 1827 in Monroe County, Tennessee. Hiram Green Henslee was also born there December the 28th, 1828. I also might have had a sister, but that's not documented yet. My father and grandfather moved to Monroe County sometime between 1820 and 1826. My father, born in 1805, married about 1826 and was listed in the 1830 in Monroe County census as having two boys. Those boys were my older brothers, Benjamin F. and Hiram G. In 1840, I was living with my grandfather in Union County, Georgia, along with my uncle Rasmore Markham Henslee and his soon-to-be wife, Sarah Morgan. My grandmother, Elizabeth, who was born about 1774, was also living there at the time. I believe that my father, Benjamin F., and Hiram were in the area of Catoosa County, Georgia, when some additional Cherokee lands were opened up in 1836. There's no records that have been found to confirm this yet. 1850s, Uniontown County, Georgia. In 1850, Hiram and I were living with my grandfather, Benjamin, and grandmother, Elizabeth. They were getting along in the years and passed away during the 1850s. My father, Benjamin, was living with his sister, who had married a Jonathan Capps in Monroe County, Tennessee, and we're now living in Bradley County, Tennessee, just across the border from Catoosa County, Georgia. Hiram had settled in Catoosa County about 1854 and married someone named S.A. He was married later to Sarah Stewart Jones from Conyers, Georgia. He was a merchant in Ringgold, Georgia. Not really sure where my oldest brother, Benjamin F., was, but probably in the Catoosa, Bradley County area. I was working as a farmer in Rabun County, Georgia, and met my bride-to-be, Emily Perlina Gillespie, a daughter of William Gillespie and Melinda Eller. Emily was born in May 12, 1836, in Rabun County. She and I were married in Clayton, May 11th, 1856. We were listed in 1860 census as being there with two of our eventually three children. James Hiram Henslee, later called Doc, was born in 1857, and Mary Ann Caldana Dovey was born November the 2nd, 1859. 1860, Rabun County, Georgia. The Civil War was in April 1861 in Charleston, when a group of Citadel students bombarded Fort Sumter in Charleston Harbor. I enlisted in a company of the 24th Georgia Infantry, which was formed of volunteers from Rabun County in July the 22nd of 1861 for a period of a year. It was very difficult to leave Emily because she had two young children and was pregnant with Ella Leona Calandona. Lovely. Lovely was born on January the 2nd, 1862. And I was in North Carolina with the 24th Georgia Infantry Regiment, defending our coastline. Little did I know that this conflict would last for 4 years and take such a devastating toll on both sides. The company that I enlisted in 1861 Civil War erupts, and it was a Company E called the Rabun Gap Riflemen. There were 10 companies in the 24th Georgia Volunteer Infantry Company. A was from Banks County. B from Hart County. C from White County. D from Town County. E from Rabun County. F from Gwinnett County. H from Franklin County. I from Hall County. K from Habersham County. There was no J Company for some reason. Interestingly enough, there was no J Company in the 25th North Carolina either. 1861, Department of North Carolina, 24th Georgia Regiment. We were mustered in August 1861 and then transported to Lynchburg, Virginia. Shortly afterward, on September the 30th, we were attached to the Department of North Carolina for coast defense in Goldsboro, North Carolina. We remained there until early 1862, when we returned to Virginia and were placed in the Army of Northern Virginia. General Robert E. Lee command. Ellen Leona Lovely was born on January the 2nd, 1862, while I was there. June 1862, Army of Northern Virginia, 24th Georgia Regiment. In April of 1862, we participated in a skirmish at Warwick Road, Virginia, on the 5th, beginning on the 5th of April until the 4th of May. We were engaged in the siege of Yorktown, Virginia. On the 16th of April, we were in an engagement at Lee's Mill, Burnt Chimneys, number 1. On the 4th of May, we participated in the evacuation of Yorktown, Virginia. On the 23rd of May, we skirmished at Ellison's Mill near Mechanicsburg, Virginia. During May the 31st and June the 1st, 1862, we were in the Battle of Seven Pines, Fair Oaks, Virginia. 7-day battles began on June the 25th and lasted until the 1st of July. During these battles, we were engaged in battles at Peach Orchard, Allen's Farm, near Fair Oaks Station, Virginia, on the 29th of June. We also were in the Battle of Savage Station on the 29th. July the 1st, 1862, found us in the Battle of Malvern Hills, Cruz Farm, and Poindexter Farm. These battles left 5,000 Confederate and 32 Yankee men lying on the slopes of Malvern Hill. July 1862, Army of Northern Virginia, 25th North Carolina Regiment, Company G. After the battle at Malvern Hill, we went to accompaniment at Drury Bluff, Virginia. about 20 miles north of Virginia, Richmond. For reasons known only to me, my first enlistment was over in July, and I enlisted in the 25th North Carolina Regiment for 3 more years for the duration of the war. The 25th North Carolina was made up of volunteers from men from western North Carolina counties, all west of Blue Ridge Mountains. These companies were composed of men from Buncombe, Henderson, Jackson, Haywood, Cherokee, Transylvania, Clay, and Macon counties. After serving with the Department of North Carolina for a year, there might have been a bonus for joining the 25th North Carolina. I mustered into Company G and remained with this company for the duration of the war. While in the encampment at Drury's Bluff, sickness of epidemic proportions and nature struck the 25th, taking 81 lives from our rank. September 1862, Harper's Ferry and Antietam, Maryland campaign. Some 2½ months later, General Lee led his troops on the Maryland campaign, which resulted in the capture of Harper's Ferry Arsenal and the Battle of Antietam, or Sharpsburg. At Harper's Ferry, we were placed to guard Loudoun Heights to prevent the escape of the enemy. We were placed in the line of battle at Sharpsburg, Maryland, at 3 a.m. in the morning of September the 17th, 1862. At 9 a.m., we moved 1/2 mile northwest of Sharpsburg and formed a line of battle under the severe fire. We immediately charged the enemy for some 200 yards, driving them from what was known as the West Woods. The enemy fiercely counterattacked again and again, but were repulsed each time. One assault by the enemy lasted 30 minutes. Aside from the constant battle and hand-to-hand combat, we were subject to 8 hours of shelling and canister by the enemy. We were fighting in the vicinity of the West and East Woods, the Dunkard's Church, the cornfield, and the Roulette House along Haggardstown Pike. This battle was to be later considered the bloodiest day of the Civil War. 5 days after the Battle of Antietam, we encamped near Martinsburg, Virginia. Our camp equipment had been left behind at Richmond on the Maryland campaign. We used ramrods for baking potatoes and forked sticks for roasting meat when we could get it. We were without blankets or extra clothing. We remained in the Shenandoah Valley for some time, then marched to Madison Courthouse, where we bivouated and drew a supply of blankets and clothing. We then marched to Fredericksburg for the winter. December 1862, winter in Fredericksburg. The winter here was severe, and shelters were made of pine brush with log fires built in the front of the shelters. We did receive extra blankets and clothes from home near. Our next large battle was the Battle of Fredericksburg on December the 11th. We took a position in the rear of the main line on Mary's Hill in support of the Washington artillery. On the 11th and 12th, we were subjected to continuous shelling from the city of Fredericksburg. On the 13th, the third day, the enemy began moving skirmishly out of the city in the direction of Mary's Heights. We were ordered along with the rest of the brigade to the crest of Mary's Hill. The enemy made one charge, which was repulsed with artillery. The second enemy charge reached within 50 yards of our Confederate position at the Stonewall, but we stopped them with heavy musket fire. A triple battle line was then formed by the enemy to make a charge which was destined to meet us, the 25th NC, head-on. Our regiment divided and began a countercharge from both sides of Mary's House. The enemy was 200 yards in front. The charge from Mary's House to the sunken road lasted less than 2 minutes. But during this charge, the 25th lost 120 men, being killed or wounded. The enemy advanced to within 150 paces of the Confederate line. The 25th counterattack helped speed them along. The 25th then took position in the sunken road, in front of Mary's house, alongside Cobb's brigade. The fourth attack by the enemy was even more intense and contained an increased number of troops. Cobb's brigade and the 25th put out a hail of bullets and shell and drove the enemy back into the town of Fredericksburg. With the evening almost gone, a fifth attack was made on Mary's Hill, leaving hundreds of additional dead and wounded Yankees in the field. A sixth and final attack, which was made on the hill after dark, was also repulsed. The enemy artillery had been at work shelling Mary's Hill throughout the day. In turn, the town of Fredericksburg was shelled by Confederate artillery. Of the 10,000 Union casualties suffered at Fredericksburg, 63 were sustained at Mary's Heights. Most of these casualties occurred in from the stone wall and the sunken road where the 25th was in action. Lieutenant Colonel Samuel Bryson was the commander of the 25th at this time. General Robert Ransom, Jr. proclaimed the 25th NC as most outstanding for their coolness and courage for their part in this battle. January 1863, North Carolina skirmishes and engagement. On January the 3rd, 1863, we left Richmond and returned to North Carolina and were stationed at Kenansville, Wilmington, and other places near the coast. During the fall and winter of '63, we were stationed at Carysburg, from which we made several excursions to check the advance of the enemy along the coast of North Carolina. These excursions resulted in many skirmishes, but no major battles. On April 14th, our General D.H. Hill commended his command for their marches, their endurance under cold and adverse weather conditions, and their accomplishments. He told us that we had whipped naval vessels with muskets and light field artillery, and had defeated 7,000 of the enemy with half as many men. He also criticized the 25th North Carolina for acting like a bunch of Yankees on the march, and suggested that we should have behaved as well on the march as we did on the battlefield. On May the 22nd, we skirmished with the U.S. 58th Pennsylvania Regiment under Colonel Richter Jones at Gun Swamp near Kinston, North Carolina. Jones indicated that he captured 125 men from the 25th North Carolina. Kinston was captured by us on December the 14th, 1863. I was placed on furlough in January and February of 1864. I traveled back to my wife and home in Clayton, Georgia, and spent some time with my family, recuperating from some injury. This is the only time that I saw my son, James Hiram, when he was old enough to remember me in later years. James would have been almost 7 years old then. I doubt that my daughters, Lovely and Dovey, would have remembered seeing me. Lovey had just turned 2, and Dovey was only 5. I would not see any of them again in this lifetime. April 1864, North Carolina, Coastal Defense. On April 15th, 1864, the regiment participated in the assault and capture of Plymouth, North Carolina. Shortly thereafter, we moved back and forth along the North Carolina-Virginia coast in constant skirmishes and engagements. 1864, Petersburg Siege Saga. On the 8th of June, we were on detached duty at Weldon, North Carolina. From here, we caught a train to Petersburg, Virginia. On the 16th, we crossed to the south of Appomattox River for the defense of Petersburg. We'd immediately entered into the fight in front of Avery's house and checked the advance of the enemy, who were driving back the Petersburg militia, the only protection for the city at this time. The Petersburg militia was made up of those not able to join to the regular Confederate Army, mostly old men and young boys. On the 17th, we participated in the engagement and drove the enemies from their breastworks at the point where the 25th made their attack. From this day forward, we were under constant fire. The engagement was the beginning of what you will know as the Siege of Petersburg, the longest siege in U.S. history. It was to last for 10 long, bloody months. Petersburg was the key to keeping the 4 railroads open to supply Richmond from the southern and western part of the Confederacy. Without these railroads, Richmond and the troops defending it would not be able to sustain for very long. This was the most critical symbol of the Confederacy. July 1864, Petersburg Siege, the crater. On July the 8th, 1864, we were in Reams Station, Virginia, and we traveled from there back to Petersburg. One of the bloodiest battles fought by the 25th North Carolina was at the scene of the crater at Petersburg, which was still under siege. At this time, the proud 25th had approximately 250 men. The tolls of war had reduced our regiment from the original enlisted of 1,100 men. The Yankees, using Pennsylvania coal miners from the 48th Pennsylvania Infantry, had dug a tunnel under the Confederate lines. Then they placed 8,000 pounds of explosives under Pegram's South Carolina battery. This was U.S. General Burnside's idea, and the objective was to attack through the hole blown in the Confederate lines. Grant had decided earlier in the conflict with the disaster at Cold Harbor that a direct frontal attack on the Petersburg and Richmond Confederate defenses was too costly to succeed in breaking through. The crater was better known as Grant's Mine and the Blow-Up, by which last name is familiarly spoken of by the soldiers at the time. We knew they were digging a tunnel, and we had dug some tunnels ourselves to try to intercept the Yankee tunnel. We didn't dig deep enough to find them, even though we could hear them when they were digging. On the night of July the 28th, every man in reserve was placed in the trenches in anticipation of the explosion. We were in the trenches some 100 or so yards to the left of Pegram's battery. At 4:45 a.m. on the morning of July the 30th, the mine was set off, blowing some 100,000 yards of dirt into the air. Along with the dirt were men, horses, cannons, muskets, etc. The crater itself was 135 feet long, 97 feet wide, and 30 feet deep. The casualties of this explosion totaled 278, with only 8 men of Pegram's battery escaping. When the dust settled, there were 4 U.S. flags to be seen in the works, with a constant stream of black and white U.S. troops trying to break through the gap blown in the Confederate line. Artillery from both sides became very heavy. Soon there were 14 U.S. battle flags to be seen on the field. The Confederate formed a flanking attack, placing the 25th North Carolina in the gap in the lines formed by the explosion. The regiment repulsed each of the 5 U.S. attempts to break through the gap for the duration of the 8-hour battle. The 25th led Mahoney's troops in counterattacks, which drove the Yankees back into the crater, forcing their surrender. During the final charge, the fighting was hand-to-hand with guns, bayonets, swords, or anything else a man could find to fight with. One 16-year-old boy had his gun knocked from his hands, so he picked up a cartridge box and used it as a weapon. The U.S. had some 3,000 troops killed in the battle at the crater, a large portion of them being colored troops. Our position was within 30 yards of the crater, which turned into a mass of pitiful humanity. We were throwing canisters and musket fire into the seething mass. The final charge was made at 2 p.m. with the 25th North Carolina leading Mahoney's troops. At this time, the few survivors within the crater surrendered. August 1864, Petersburg Siege, Battle of Weldon Railroad. The 21st of August, we participated in the Battle of Weldon Railroad between Petersburg and Rim Station. We captured the heavily fortified earthworks of the enemy and protected the railroad leading into Petersburg. The fighting was fierce, and although we captured the earthworks, we suffered heavy casualties in this action. Winter 1865, Petersburg Siege. The siege at Petersburg continued while the rest of Lee's army was slowly being destroyed. There were constant mortar attacks, sharp shooting, cavalry and infantry attacks at Petersburg. Disease also took its toll from the ranks, and the morale of Lee's army was very low. The winter of 1864 and 1865 was severe. By late March, supply lines were gone, except for the South Side Railroad, and Richmond was on the verge of falling. On the 25th of March, 1865, members of the 25th North Carolina Regiment participated in the capture of Fort Stedman, which was done without firing a shot. Fort Stedman was opposite the Confederate line at Petersburg. We were assigned to maintain this fort. The overwhelming force of the enemy eventually recaptured Fort Stedman, causing great losses to the 25th North Carolina. March and April of 1865, Siege of Petersburg, Battle of Five Forks. On the 30th of March, we were marching to defend the South Side Railroad north of Dinwiddie Courthouse. On the 1st of April, we were marched to establish a defense line along with Oak Road and block the advance of the U.S. Army of the Shenandoah led by General Sheridan. The 25th was one of 4 brigades led by General Pickett's Infantry Division. F. Lee and his Cavalry Corps had 2 divisions. Munford and W. H. F. Lee also reported to Pickett. We arrived at White Oak Road about noon on the 1st and immediately began digging a battle line of breastworks and trenches about 1.5 miles long, centered at Five Forks along the White Oaks Road. Five Forks was about 5 miles from Dinwiddie Courthouse, where the U.S. troops were encamped. The generals didn't anticipate on an attack from Sheridan, since we had run them back to Dinwiddie Courthouse the previous day. The generals were invited to Shattuck by one of the officers, and they left without anyone knowing where they were going. They were about 2 miles north of White Oaks Road. U.S. General Sheridan's battle plan was to have U.S. Warren's V Corps attack the Confederate left flank at the angle, while U.S. Custer's cavalry, Devon's division, pressed the Confederate infantry along with their front, attacking when the V Corps became actively engaged. At 4:15 p.m., U.S. Warren's Corps formed an echelon and moved forward. U.S. Ayres Division hit the entrenched Confederates along the 150-yard-long angle as U.S. Crawford's division broke away and swung to the north behind Pickett's battle line. U.S. Griffin's division moved to support the 2 advance divisions. Custer's 2 brigades rode into position to attack the Confederate right flank. Ayres' men captured about Confederate 1,000 prisoners at the angle from Ransom, 25th North Carolina, and Wallace's brigade, while McGregor's 4 cannons escaped to Forge Road. I was wounded by many balls in both thighs during this overwhelming attack. We were outnumbered anywhere from 5 to 12 to 1. Although the generals raced back to the battle line, there were very little they could do to change the outcome of the battle at Five Forks. The South Side Railroad was now compromised, and Lee notified Jefferson Davis that Richmond and Petersburg would have to be evacuated. Lee was going west to try and connect with General Johnston's army coming up from North Carolina. After all the skirmishing and engagements with the 24th Georgia Infantry and the 25th of North Carolina Infantry, I was wounded and captured. I was placed in the U.S. hospital at Fairgrounds Post Hospital in Petersburg on April 3rd, 1865. For me, the war was over. The remainder of Lee's army of Northern Virginia would do their final surrender a week later on April 9th, 1865, Appomattox Courthouse in Virginia. April through May 1865, hospital, Five Forks aftermath. I was transferred to the U.S. General Hospital at Petersburg, now called City Point, on the 17th of April, diagnosed as having a GSW, gunshot wound, by many balls in both thighs. I was there for a couple of weeks and then transferred to another hospital. I was transferred to the U.S. General Hospital, Army of the James Point of Rocks, Virginia, on the 8th of May, 1865. On the 17th of May, I was again transferred for the last time to the U.S. General Hospital at Fort Monroe, Virginia. The admission document said I still had a flesh wound in the left thigh. The right thigh obviously had healed enough not to be listed as a serious wound. Fort Monroe is a very old fort in the Hampton Road area of Virginia. It's about 60 miles from Petersburg on the coast. I would not be the only Confederate prisoner there. Our deposed Confederacy President Jefferson Davis is also here with me. He was captured a few weeks later in Georgia and placed in the casement prison at Fort Monroe. However, I'm sure his cell is much better than mine. May through July 1865, Fort Monroe, Virginia. While here at Fort Monroe, I've had plenty of time to think about the past 4 years of marching, fighting, scrounging for food, friends and foes, gruesome deaths, families, and the future that would be very difficult for all of us. I haven't been able to communicate with my family, so I don't know how they were surviving in my absence. It is now July the 23rd, 1865. The war is over. I have contracted typhoid fever and fear that I will not last much longer. Almost a third of all Civil War Confederate soldiers have died from disease. I fear that I will be no exception. I regret that I will never know my descendants. But through this biographical sketch, I hope that you will now know me. William C. Henslee. X.
Comments, suggestions, requests, thanks. William Conrad Henslee died at Fort Monroe, Virginia on July 24, 1865. He is buried in the Hampton National Cemetery, Section D, Plot 2110, a couple of miles from Fort Monroe on the campus of Hampton University. We placed some flowers on his grave on the 136th anniversary of his death, probably the first ones ever placed there by a descendant. We have worked with the director of the cemetery to erect a new monument so that those who might like to visit can find him more easily. He can now rest in peace, knowing that now, after 136 years, his descendants know what he did, why he did it, and where his resting place is. No longer an unmarked or mismarked grave. He is buried with almost 25,000 soldiers, many of which gave their all for their country. some who will never be known. If you have an opportunity to visit the Petersburg area, do take the driving tour of the Petersburg National Battlefields. You can walk on the very ground that your ancestor fought on during the siege: Fort Wadsworth, the Crater, Five Forks, etc. Do go to the Five Forks battle site, which is about 20 miles south of Petersburg on I-85 at Dinwiddie exit. Go north on Dinwiddie Courthouse Road for about 5 miles. You can't miss it. The only portion of this historic site that is still recognizable is the angle, the very spot where William was wounded and captured. You can still see the trench placements after 136 years and sit and let your mind wander back to what it might have been like on that day, on April the 1st, 1865. The trees were not there. It was an open field. Anthony and I are sitting in one of the trenches that extends 100 yards or so from White Oak Road. Rob believes that where we are sitting, William sat there also. This site is planned to be restored in the near future to the way it looked back in April of 1865. The remainder of the Confederate defense line at Five Forks is gone, and this is the only section remaining. Maybe it was just waiting for us to find it. During the war, the 25th North Carolina Regiment, not to mention those captured and the deserters, suffered the following losses: killed in battle, 220. Died from disease, 280. Wounded, 470. 140 of which were wounded more than once. The regimental statistics indicate that a soldier's probability of enduring the war without being wounded or killed were against odds greater than 1,000 to 1. The Civil War claimed 660,000 casualties, more than all the other wars combined. During this research, I was amazed at how little I really knew about this conflict. Many of us think that the war was over slavery. This is not true for the vast majority of the Confederate soldiers. Many of us think that all Southerners were in favor of slavery and withdrawing from the Union. This is not true. For example, West Virginia was formed because of the division of the Union and Southern states. What is true about the Civil War is it was a horrendous waste of young men's lives that it cost our country dearly. In the South, nearly every family had a father, a son, or a brother killed or wounded in this conflict. If you would like to hear some songs written by individuals who experienced the conflict, there's a CD called Civil War, the Nashville Sessions. I recommend it highly. Not only will it bring a tear to your eye, but it will present a view from someone who was there. It's from a 1999 Broadway production called The Civil War. What was the Civil War really about? On reflecting about this bloody conflict that found brothers warring against brothers, there are some misconceptions about why we fought. General Matt Ransom, the general who led the brigade of North Carolinians, including the 25th North Carolina Regiment, wrote why we fought in a speech that was recorded in the Raleigh News and Observer on August the 11th, 1883. He was concerned that future historians might misunderstand the origins of the Civil War just concluded. He said, quote, "It is incorrect to state," end quote, he insisted, the South went to war over slavery. The South went to war because of her love for liberty, because of her jealousy of her rights, her liberties, and her independence. The 10 millions of Southern people who owned no slaves offered their husbands, sons, fathers, brothers upon the altar of their country, a willing sacrifice for independence, not for slavery. What happened to William's widow after the war? William's widow, Emily Perlana Gillespie, remarried about 1866 to Oliver Dixon Price, born April 15, 1837. Oliver was also a widower. His wife had died, leaving him a son, Sylvester, born in 1859. They had 5 other children together. Their children were James L. Price, born in 1866, Caleb Price, 1868, buried at Head of Tennessee Baptist Church in Dillard, Georgia, John W. Price, 1870, Joseph F. Price, 1872, and Lily A. Price, 1874. Emily died on August the 8th, 1885, and is buried near Leona, Lovey, and her husband, Ham Scroggs, in Hayesville, North Carolina. All of William and Emily's children died in the 1930s. I haven't yet found Caledonia, Callie Dovey, yet, but I believe it might be in Brasstown, North Carolina. What's all the confusion about Henslee and Hensley? William's name was spelled at least 6 different ways on his unit record. The typical spelling is Hensley, but I've found at least 15 different ways that it has been recorded. After 20 plus years of reading microfilm and poring over old records, you must have an open mind when you're looking in these records. There's no wonder that transcription interpretations, notice that it really isn't an error, just what one person thought or thinks he sees, led to names like Hiram Henslee as Hiram Gilmer, Henslee as Hensey, Hensee, Hensley as Housler, variations such as Hansley, Hensley, 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 Hamsley, Henchley, and some other that aren't even close. Documents such as Amos Hensley Benjamin, 1776's brother. His will states Amos Hensley, Henslee, but he couldn't write, so he signed his name as an X, and someone wrote Amos Hensley, Hensly, Hensley, as the signature. Why spell his name Henslee rather than Hensley? His grandfather Benjamin C.A. 1776 spelled it Henslee in 1850. His 2 brothers, Benjamin F. and Hiram Green, spelled it Henslee, and his son James Hiram spelled it Henslee. Since William could not read nor write in 1860, he didn't know the difference. His ancestors and descendants do, so that is what I asked to be placed on his new headstone at Hampton National Cemetery. I have the mismarked headstone that was replaced in July of 2001. It is engraved as W.C. Hausler, and even though the last name was misspelled due to transcription interpretations, it has marked his hallowed ground resting place for the last 136 years. William's new headstone now will appear as W.C. Hensley, Henslee. Where did all this information come from? I have brazenly borrowed excerpts from the websites for the 24th Georgia Infantry Regiment and the 25th North Carolina Regiment, as well as comments by General Matt Ransom in his biography by Clayton Charles Marlowe. I've also added information that Rob and I obtained from Williams Unit Records and the Civil War database on the internet, and a Civil War Records Research Company in Wilmington, North Carolina. His record of interment is on the internet at Hampton National Cemetery, accessible through www.interment.net. Evelyn Brown provided the picture of William in what appears as a uniform. I believe that this is the only known picture of William. County Heritage Books of Clay County, North Carolina, Cherokee County, North Carolina, Rabun County, Georgia, and Andrew Ritchie's book on Rabun County Remembrances provided some genealogical information used in this document. Personal research through the census records and other descendants of Benjamin Henslee, ca. 1776, led to the siblings of William. Placement of the U.S. and Confederate troops at Five Forks is from a document we bought at the Five Forks site. The book Petersburg, the Last Citadel is an excellent document on the siege of Petersburg, and from it I have used some of the descriptions of the battles. There's a wealth of published information available at the Petersburg Battlefield Visitor Center. One of the park rangers there, Joyce Henry, provided invaluable assistance in typing up a major loose end on William and his connection to the North Carolina 25th Regiment. If you visit and see her, thank her for all of William's descendants. Many, many hours of research, almost 20 years of data gathering, reading numerous books, and poring over rolls and rolls of microfilm are the basis of this document. I will freely share it with members of the William Henslee line, but do not wish it to be published outside this audience. It is a work in progress document, since I will be adding additional information as I discover it. Please respect my and many of your efforts in compiling our family heritage. Share it with our families, but do not distribute it to any outside agencies or individuals. And it's signed by the people who compiled all of this evidence: Joe, Robin, Cecil, Teresa, Bruce, Jeff, and Anthony Henslee, Henslee. 4008 Capul Street, Durham, North Carolina. September 15th, 2001. All rights reserved.